Now, biblically, this is consistent with God's pronouncement of judgment in the Old and the New Testament as He hands over creation to their own corrupted selves. For instance, in the Old Testament, there are many instances where God is said to have handed over Israel to their enemies as judgments. We can recall in the book of Judges, it says that God handed them over to their enemies, etc. In the New Testament, God is said to give people over to their own sinful hearts. We see this in Romans 1, verses 18 through 32. Thus, God's judgments, in a sense, are Him withholding His goodness from His creation and handing it over to its own corrupted nature. I heard it put this way one time. God will actually use moral evil as punishment for moral evil. Like in Romans 1. The creatures, they rejected God. They desired themselves. So what does it say? God handed them over to the lust of their own hearts. He didn't put that in there. It was their own sinful desire, and God just said, "You want to be that way? Fine, be that way." And that is how we see God's judgment working pretty consistently in Scripture, even all the way to the end in the book of Revelation. One of the verses at the end says, "He who is righteous, let him be righteous still, and he who is filthy, let him be filthy still." Basically, God is just saying, that's what you want to be? I'm going to let you be that way. Indeed, that is it's horrible to hear that from God when He's basically fed up with you and He's just handed you over to your enemies. But what about natural evil? Okay, because that theory certainly posits, it certainly handles moral evil very well, I think. But what about natural evil? Now, certainly, again, we must acknowledge that God decrees this as well. We cannot get around that. And again, we note from Isaiah 45, verses 5 through 7, that God is the one who brings natural evil as punishments. Thus, what we often consider evil is actually an expression of the justice and the righteousness of God. It is often the case that people want to cry foul against God when disaster strikes. But, again, if God is holy, if He's just, and He does not commit sin, okay, and we can see that again from Genesis 18:25 also, okay, God is will not the judge of the earth do what is right, okay. Whatever happens in the world, if God is in control, whatever happens in the world, whether good or whether it's our perceiving it as evil, it is either an expression of the goodness and the mercy of God or the justice and the righteous wrath of God. But God does not sin. Now, the topic of evil, as a final word for this part of the study, the topic of evil is not an easy one, okay? Christian, non-Christian, theist, and atheist have experienced sin and evil in the world. Nobody's a stranger to it. How should we respond to evil? How should we respond to God when hard times come? Here I think Job gives us some wisdom that is often overlooked. When Job's family and health were taken away, Job was asked to curse God by his wife. Much like modern times, we're tempted to curse God when hard times come. But Job gives us wisdom well worth considering when he says this: "Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not also accept adversity?" As sinners, I think our problem is not that we experience things like suffering and sin and evil. Rather, our problem is that we experience the goodness of God at all. Because as sinners, we totally do not deserve any of His goodness, any of His mercy, or any of His grace. We can each be justly held under the wrath of God, condemned to punishment, period, and that's it. And God wouldn't be wrong in doing it. The problem is not evil. The problem is when we experience God's goodness, when we get a taste of that. Indeed, what miserable creatures we are to only want that which we do not deserve from God, but we cry foul when He gives us the slightest taste of what we do deserve.